Rebecca Fenton had always loved her solitary life, a peaceful, free life, with no one to disturb her daily routine. But sometimes, love can turn all our certainties upside down, can't it? And Rebecca was ready to leave behind her cherished tranquility for one man, Larry. Their meeting had been brief, almost anodyne, but it had been enough to ignite a flame, a growing passion that bound them together for several years. 4 years, to be exact. 4 years of a love so intense that nothing seemed able to separate them. Until the day it all fell apart. The day Rebecca found Larry, lifeless, lying in a pool of his own blood. How could such a tragedy have happened? Could Larry, this kind man, this model of kindness, have been the target of an act of violence? What if it wasn't mere chance? What if the person who loved him most had played a part in his death? Rebecca, guilty or victim? A question no one wanted to ask out loud, but one that was on everyone's lips. It was February 3rd, 2008, when Clearwater police received the call that would change everything. A woman, her voice trembling, was calling for help. The woman was Rebecca Fenton. She had just returned home from a sports session to find Larry lying unconscious. She still believed he was breathing, that he could be saved. So she tried, but to no avail. In despair, she dialed 911. But deep inside her, another fear was growing. What if Larry had been attacked, and the assailant was still out there? Rebecca was waiting outside by her car when help arrived. But for Larry, it was too late. At 57, his life had come to an abrupt halt. Meanwhile, the police were busy searching the house for the slightest clue, an investigation that would soon turn its attention to Rebecca herself. Who was she really? Rebecca Tootin had been born in 1967 in Tucson, Arizona, in a military hospital. But her entry into the world had not been surrounded by love. Her mother, alone, had not wished to keep her. So, at just 18 months old, Rebecca was adopted by an athletic family in a small village called Winslow. Her new parents, unable to have children of their own, welcomed her with immense love, making her their sunshine. But as she grew older, Rebecca felt cramped in this village with no horizon. She dreamed of something bigger, something wider. Right out of high school, she enrolled at university, hoping to find what she was looking for. But homesickness eventually caught up with her. By this time, she was living in Boston, working to support herself. Then one day, her path led her to Florida. And there, it was like love at first sight. The sun, the beaches, the vibrant life. Rebecca fell in love with the place to the point of not wanting to leave. She found an apartment not far from the sea, surrounded by her friends, and a career in psychology that opened up a wealth of opportunities. At the same time, she worked for a nursing service and became involved in raising awareness of mental disorders. A fulfilling life, on the face of it. But behind this perfect picture, who could have guessed the drama that was brewing? Rebecca was an outgoing, vivacious young woman, one of those who grabbed your attention as soon as you walked into a room. She had that charisma, that light that attracted men. Yet despite all her encounters, she had never wanted to become attached to any of them. She loved her freedom, her independent life, and nothing seemed to convince her to change. She lived for herself, enjoying every moment. Rebecca took such good care of herself that she always looked radiant. Fitness had become her routine, her escape, and it suited her perfectly. But life was never as simple as that. In 1998, big news turned her life upside down. After years of searching, her biological mother had found her. Just imagine, more than 30 years without knowing each other, and suddenly, reconciliation. Rebecca was overjoyed to meet the woman who had given birth to her. Of course, this didn't mean she was cutting ties with her adoptive parents, who had raised her with such love. She continued to divide her time between Florida and Arizona, where she spent precious time with her mother, while remaining close to her adoptive family. This new balance seemed to suit her perfectly, until 2003, when an unexpected call disrupted her life once again. It was Larry Fenton, a 36-year-old man who introduced himself as Rebecca's boyfriend. He was 17 years older than her, and his approach was as direct as it was traditional. He called his family to formally introduce himself and ask for her hand in marriage. This gesture, almost from another time, surprised Rebecca, but she felt that this man had entered her life to stay. Larry wasn't just anyone. He was an accomplished businessman who had begun his career as an architect before moving into the medical equipment sales business. At the time of the call, he had become one of the top executives of the Getting USA company, a household name in hospitals and medical centers across the United States. He'd already been through 3 marriages and 3 divorces, but with Rebecca, something seemed different. Their meeting had taken place quite casually, one day after one of her sports sessions. Larry, whom she didn't know, had approached her near his car. A short chat, followed by an invitation to coffee. And then everything changed. Rebecca had been seduced not only by his confidence, but also by his simplicity. He never bragged about his achievements, and yet he was simply perfect in her eyes. Months passed, and the relationship between them grew stronger. Rebecca didn't hesitate to confide in those close to her that she thought she'd found the love of her life. Larry was a gentleman, thoughtful, considerate. She was convinced he was the one she'd been waiting for all this time. Barely a year after they met, they married, and Rebecca took his surname, Fenton. She had found her Prince Charming. But, as we all know, love stories don't always follow the course we hope. In fact, there were 2 ceremonies. The first, more grandiose, took place in Florida. But a second, more intimate ceremony was held in Arizona, especially for the family of Rebecca's biological mother. A meaningful gesture, don't you think? Larry, always thoughtful, had bought a magnificent house for their new life together. A historic property, built in 1926, located just a few blocks from the ocean. An idyllic setting, worthy of the most beautiful postcards. Once settled, Rebecca no longer needed to work. Her husband provided for all their needs. She devoted herself to their home, taking care of the old house and flower garden. It was like a life from a fairy tale. The couple shared a passion for sport, so much so that they built a private gym on their property. Even after 4 years of marriage, their relationship seemed to intensify. A love so strong, so solid. But sometimes, fate is cruel. Everything changed on February 3rd, 2008. That day, Rebecca was returning from their gym next door. But when she got home, she discovered the unthinkable. Panic, fear. Rebecca immediately called 911, declaring that her husband had been shot. When the police arrived, they found the young woman in a state of shock, sitting on the side of the road in front of their house. Inside, Larry's body lay in a pool of blood just beyond the front door. He had been riddled with bullets, in the hand, the neck, the back. The murder had been brutal. Paramedics saw the irreparable. Larry, a 57-year-old medical equipment salesman, had not survived. The fatal bullet had hit his neck, causing massive hemorrhaging. He bled to death within minutes. An atrocious end. Rebecca, still in shock, told the investigators that she had heard gunshots as she returned from her workout. Larry was getting ready to watch the Super Bowl. While she was working out, she heard a strange noise, but paid no attention to it. When she returned home, she found her husband lying lifeless. Panicked, she grabbed her phone, rushed outside and called 911 from her car. She also noted that several items had disappeared. A laptop, jewelry, and an iPod. A burglary gone wrong? Could Larry have stumbled upon the thieves and paid with his life? Worse still, one of their vehicles was missing. Larry was driving a large SUV, but only Rebecca's small Hyundai was still in the driveway. Investigators soon realized that finding this vehicle could lead them to the murderer. This tragedy shook their community to its core. Larry was well known and respected, but who could have wanted to take his life? Was it a tragic coincidence or a much darker truth? The car was put on the wanted list, and the authorities hoped the thieves would be quickly apprehended. The crime scene was secured, and all neighbors were interviewed. But, much to their surprise, no one had seen anything suspicious, nor any unknown vehicles in the area. The only relevant information, confirmed by several witnesses, was a series of 4 or 5 gunshots heard around 4:30 p.m. Investigators searched the house, but found no signs of forced entry. Nothing to suggest that a stranger had broken in. However, several drawers had been opened, and the items inside were in disarray, a classic sign of a robbery. Despite the widow's claims that several personal items had disappeared, the police noticed something strange. There were still valuables in place. Cash, checks, precious jewelry. It was all still there, in plain sight. Wasn't that strange? Usually thieves take whatever they can get their hands on, no questions asked. Later, Larry's car was found, just a few blocks from the murder scene. But what really intrigued the investigators were the stolen objects. There was no valuable jewelry, just odds and ends like costume jewelry, a box of coins, Larry's iPod, and his laptop. What a strange haul. And why had he taken these items specifically? It was anything but logical. Even stranger, why commit a robbery on Super Bowl day, when everyone was at home, riveted to the game? It seemed too risky to be a simple burglary. What was the real motive behind this act? A robbery gone wrong, or a darker intention? Burglars, as a rule, operate discreetly, unseen, and avoid entering homes where the owners are present. So why did this case seem to defy all the usual rules? It was precisely these contradictions with the facts that convinced the police that the whole thing was staged. But who would want to make Larry's murder look like a simple burglary? After inspecting the crime scene, the officers took Rebecca to the police station for her official testimony. The widow, visibly upset and in a state of shock, had difficulty articulating her answers to the investigators. Yet she managed to confide in them a disturbing lead. She associated what had just happened with a strange man she had met on the internet. Rebecca revealed that the first incident had occurred the previous autumn. One evening, while parked near a supermarket, a stranger had approached her car, approaching her without the slightest embarrassment. The man told her he'd never seen such a beautiful woman, and that he absolutely wanted to get to know her. But Rebecca rejected him without hesitation. Wounded in his pride, the man drove away empty-handed in his black car. But this encounter was only the beginning. Rebecca had noticed the same black car circling their house. On several occasions, the vehicle seemed to follow the couple across town. Convinced she was being stalked, Rebecca told Larry, who was immediately concerned for his wife's safety. To protect himself, he bought a gun, a .38 caliber revolver, which he kept in a nylon satchel in his sock drawer. Following Rebecca's confession, the police decided to return to the couple's home to investigate further and find the weapon. But curiously, the revolver had disappeared. On February 4th, 2008, less than 24 hours after Larry's death, the investigation took a dark turn. The investigators were beginning to doubt Rebecca's version of events. There was no tangible proof that an intruder had broken into the house. Everything seemed to point to a staged event. The hypothesis that Larry had been killed with his own revolver was soon put forward. But one question remained unanswered. What if this mysterious stalker really did exist? The investigators had to explore this lead, fragile though it was. Yet despite their best efforts, no trace of this supposed stalker was found. So who was telling the truth? But at the same time, it was still possible that Rebecca wasn't lying. A burglar could very well have broken into the house, rummaged around for valuables, and stumbled across the gun. If Larry had surprised him then, the thief could have used the gun to get rid of an inconvenient witness. Did this hypothesis still hold water? All hell broke loose when another close examination of the victim's car revealed a startling discovery. Under the driver's seat of the SUV, the investigators found the couple's revolver, the one that had disappeared from the house. But that wasn't all. In Rebecca's car, they found Larry's car keys, the jewelry he always carried with him, and 5 bullet casings. Inside the house, precisely 5 shots had been fired. The coincidence seemed far too suspicious. And that wasn't all. Rebecca had been the last person to see Larry alive. What's more, the police had noticed his strange behavior on the images filmed by the journalists present at the crime scene. While the scene should have been one of gravity, Rebecca appeared smiling and joking with the police. She was laughing and seemed at ease, which aroused suspicion right from the start. The widow later explained that she was simply in shock, an involuntary reaction in her opinion. But the evidence was mounting against her. Little by little, everything seemed to point to Rebecca as the main suspect. Yet there were still gray areas. The widow bore no traces of blood on her person, something almost inevitable for someone who had committed murder at close range. What's more, Rebecca had passed 3 lie detector tests, and during her first visit to the police station, her hands had been analyzed. The result? No gunpowder residue. Even so, the investigators had their doubts. They thought she might have carefully cleaned her hands, or shot while wearing gloves. This would have explained the absence of any traces. Determined to get more answers, the detectives decided to question Rebecca again. They contacted her to ask her to return to the police station, but this time her attitude changed radically. Rebecca categorically refused to cooperate and called in a law firm to defend herself. She justified her silence by saying she had nothing more to say to the police. Faced with this refusal, the investigators redoubled their efforts to delve into Rebecca's past. Did she have sufficient motive to commit such an atrocious act? Was she a loving wife or a calculating murderer? Clues sometimes hide much darker truths. The police soon discovered that the widow had a criminal past. However, nothing too serious, no murders or violent robberies. At the age of 20, she had been arrested on charges of prostitution, an activity she had engaged in after moving to Florida. Rebecca had become a high-class escort before she met her husband, and at the same time, she earned money by posing in low-budget adult films. She never denied her past, admitting herself that she had done what she was accused of. It was Larry, her husband, who had pulled her out of this destructive spiral, offering her a stability and security she'd never had before. Thanks to him, she had been able to give up her illegal activities and end her career in the sex industry. But there was another side to Rebecca, more complex and less visible. After her marriage to the wealthy businessman, friends tell of her boredom. She had always been accustomed to an active life, full of traveling with her clients, a free and unencumbered life. The role of housewife didn't suit her at all. It only reminded her of the emptiness of her past. But that wasn't the only difficulty she faced. Rebecca had also struggled for years with alcoholism. She had even joined a support group for Alcoholics Anonymous. At the same time, she had problems with taking the medication prescribed by her doctor. However, as soon as she joined the group, her condition improved. It seemed that she really wanted to get out and was making an effort to do so. Little by little, she had changed, seeking to lead a healthier, more sober life. But things were about to get even more complicated. Shortly before the crime, Rebecca had confessed to her therapist, a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, that she had romantic feelings for another man. This man was a chef, a member of the same group, with whom she attended meetings. But then, what had prompted her to make such a confession? An inner crisis? Or a real temptation that threatened her new life? They got closer, and this information was confirmed by the neighbors. Many had noticed that, after her husband's death, an unknown man had started visiting Rebecca regularly. Always at the same time, he would arrive around midnight and leave at 5 in the morning. Strange, isn't it? It seemed obvious that the couple were trying to hide their relationship, but curious neighbors were quick to unmask them. This detail was not lost on the investigators. A secret affair, hidden in the shadows of the night. What if this was a motive for murder? And could this mysterious lover be an accomplice in this dark story? It all seemed plausible. But when the police decided to check the alibi of the alleged lover, they were in for a surprise. He had a solid alibi. Several witnesses testified that, at the time of Larry's attack, he was at home, watching the Super Bowl. A coincidence, however, that proved to be the undoing of this hypothesis. And so, on the list of potential suspects, only one name remained, that of Rebecca, the widow. But at this stage of the investigation, the detectives still had no direct evidence against her. Sure, indirect clues were piling up, forming a complex web around her guilt, but it wasn't enough to build a solid case in court. A matter of time, they said. For as the forensic and ballistic tests progressed, the truth slowly began to emerge. The results were in. Larry's self-defense revolver was indeed the murder weapon. But one chilling detail remained. No fingerprints had been found on it. The killer had been meticulous, methodical. There was no rush on the part of the investigators. They took the time to study every clue, to unravel every thread of this complex case. But despite years of work, no charges were ever brought against Rebecca. Meanwhile, the widow's life began to unravel. Her relationship with the chef ended, and she fell under the sway of a violent man. Another tragedy. Then a new battle erupted, over Larry's legacy. Rebecca and the victim's family clashed. But in the end, most of the estate went to Larry's relatives, leaving Rebecca with almost nothing. Unable to find stability, she plunged back into alcohol, abandoning her Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. 5 years after her husband's death, in 2013, she lost her house. She could no longer pay the mortgage and was declared insolvent. A few months later, the eviction notice arrived. Coincidence or desperation? Shortly afterwards, a fire completely destroyed the house. Yet another tragedy in an already dark story. But was it really just coincidence? Rebecca fell back into the abyss and moved to a trailer park in Clearwater. It was there that everything took a new turn. A new investigation was opened against her, this time for arson. Experts claimed to have found traces of a flammable liquid in the rubble of her home, evidence she might have used to fan the flames. But why? According to them, she had set the fire to collect on the insurance. At the time, Rebecca was desperate and had only one motive: money. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The investigation revealed that, before the fire, another disturbing incident had taken place in the house. In the summer of 2012, some 4 years after her husband's death, Rebecca had again called for help. This time, she reported domestic violence. Her new boyfriend, a certain Alfred, had allegedly laid hands on her. The authorities' intervention had earned him a restraining order, and Rebecca had obtained protection from him. Alfred, however, remained elusive. The investigators had difficulty locating him, but eventually interviewed his nephew and his nephew's girlfriend. What they heard was astonishing. The nephew claimed that his uncle Alfred had told him about a woman who had killed her husband. This revelation reignited the case. The police redoubled their efforts to find Alfred, and when they finally did, they were in for another shock. Alfred was already serving a prison sentence, albeit for a crime unrelated to Larry's murder. But he became a key witness in the case. In 2014, 6 years after Larry's death, investigators knocked on Rebecca's trailer door. They arrested her and charged her with first-degree murder. The centerpiece of this case? Alfred's testimony. This man, once her companion, claimed that Rebecca had confided in him that she had killed her husband. It was a bombshell in the case, and although Rebecca denied it outright, her refusal to cooperate with the investigators only worsened her situation. On November 3, 2015, Rebecca Fenton's trial began. 48 years old, she was accused of murdering Larry, her husband of 57 years, in February 2008. From the outset, she had maintained her innocence, but she remained the prime suspect. Her lawyers tried to play this up, accusing the police of negligence and bias. They claimed that the investigators had focused on Rebecca from the outset and had never looked for other leads. The prosecutor, on the other hand, had solid arguments. The evidence found in Larry's missing car weighed heavily. The car keys, jewelry belonging to the victim, 5 revolver casings, all of which had been discovered in the accused's car. If Rebecca was innocent, how could these objects have ended up there? The case of the stolen car itself was strange. Why did the car contain stolen goods if it wasn't staged? The investigators also suggested that Rebecca had lied on one crucial point. She claimed to have checked her husband's pulse after finding him dead. But according to forensic experts, no one had touched the body. Lie or distorted truth. A man lying in a pool of blood. Nothing moved. Not a trace. So was it another lie from the widow? Yet Rebecca's story didn't make sense, not to the prosecutor. It seemed made up. A burglar would have come in, climbed the stairs, miraculously found a revolver hidden in the bedroom drawer, then gone back downstairs to shoot Larry, all without making a sound. Then he would search the house, taking a few insignificant trinkets and leaving the valuables in plain sight. As if that wasn't enough, he took an SUV, drove a few blocks away and abandoned it, before returning to the scene of the crime. Why would he do this? To replace the murder weapon and deposit stolen items in Rebecca's car. It all made absolutely no sense. The prosecutor didn't believe it, not for a second. To him, the whole burglary thing was a farce, and the motive? Greed. Rebecca wanted to get rich, to get rid of Larry, the man who had become a nuisance, to live life to the full with her lover. Larry Fenton, a successful businessman, had everything going for him. But Rebecca, she wanted more. It wasn't an assumption that came out of nowhere. The marriage contract told a different story. Larry, cautious, had imposed it from the start. He knew about Rebecca's troubled past, her 3 divorces. He wanted to protect himself and his estate. According to the agreement, in the event of divorce, Larry would keep everything. His assets, his savings, even the house. Rebecca would get nothing, not a penny. So divorce or murder? The scales tipped dangerously toward the worst. The testimony of Rebecca's biological mother added an essential piece to the puzzle. According to her, Rebecca did indeed have a lover, and Larry, for his part, had found out about it. That was the spark. Their marriage was now just a facade, and if the divorce came through, Rebecca would be ruined. The marriage contract, which was supposed to protect Larry, would have signed his death warrant, but Rebecca wouldn't back down. In court, she repeated her story over and over again, or almost. This time, she left out a few details. No more pretending she'd tried to save her husband. No, she claimed to have told him to hold on, to wait for the ambulance. The audio tape of her 911 call was played in front of everyone. And then everything changed. The prosecutor underlined every suspicious word. Rebecca talked too much. Much too much. She added unnecessary details, justifications that only aggravated her words. I think my husband was shot. Someone broke into my house. I just checked his pulse. I was at the gym right behind the house. 8 times. 8 times she mentioned the gym during this call, as if she absolutely wanted to convince the whole world that she had nothing to do with it. I could never have killed my husband. I love my husband. This man is my life. I can't live without him. He loves me. I love him. But why did she need to repeat it so much? What was she trying to prove? Of course, Rebecca was already seeing another man, and divorce seemed inevitable. All this reinforced the image of a calculating, lying woman that the prosecutor relentlessly portrayed. But convincing as it all sounded, there was a flaw in the picture that the prosecution couldn't ignore. The entire case rested on purely circumstantial evidence. No DNA, no fingerprints, not on the weapon, not at the crime scene. Nothing tangible to link Rebecca directly to Larry's murder. It was only with the testimony of Rebecca's lover Alfred that the case took a decisive turn. Alfred recounted their chaotic relationship, marked by incessant arguments. According to him, during one of their violent clashes, Rebecca held a knife to his throat, shouting that she would kill him as she had killed her husband. These words, spoken in a fit of anger, confirmed his suspicions. She had indeed eliminated Larry for the money, but could he really be believed? Alfred had his own reasons for cooperating with the prosecution. In exchange for his testimony, he had secured his release from custody. Was he sincere, or was he just trying to save himself? To corroborate his claims, 2 other witnesses were called to the stand, his nephew and his nephew's girlfriend. They too claimed to have heard Rebecca make incriminating statements. Rebecca, for her part, maintained her innocence to the bitter end. She took the stand to defend her version of events, insisting that she had nothing to do with her husband's death. But on November 13th, 2015, the jury retired to deliberate. It took them just 2 hours. 2 short hours to seal her fate. Rebecca was found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence? Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. It was a blow, even for her, who seemed devastated by the verdict. What was even more astonishing was that even her biological mother declared it a just decision. Rebecca, on the other hand, didn't understand. She kept saying that she could never have hurt the man who had given her a comfortable life, whom she had sincerely loved. But no one believed her. All her attempts at appeal were rejected. And so the story ended in a quiet little town. Elizabeth City, North Carolina, USA. A town where everything seemed peaceful, where calm reigned. But this illusion was shattered at 2 a.m. one August evening, 2018. A 45-year-old woman, Angel Sawyer, knocked frantically on her neighbor's door. She was in tears, unable to catch her breath. According to her, an intruder had broken into her home and killed her husband. She was still tied up, distraught, unable to call for help earlier. The neighbor, shocked but determined, immediately dialed 911. A man called 911, recounting that a neighbor had just knocked on his door. She was in tears, distraught, repeating that her husband had been killed. Her face bore traces of blood, and in a trembling voice, she claimed that the assailant was armed with a pistol. She said he had tried to steal money and jewelry, but that she had miraculously managed to escape. Faced with this situation, dispatch immediately sent an emergency team to the address. The woman, shocked and in a state of panic, stayed at her neighbor's house to wait for the police. Shortly afterwards, the officers arrived on the scene. The main door of the house was closed, but they soon realized that the back entrance had been left open. Cautiously, they entered the house through this exit, ready for anything. Going upstairs, they discovered the master bedroom. The room was turned upside down, drawers ripped out, their contents strewn across the floor, and an impressive array of gold and silver jewelry strewn about. Such was the chaos that, at first glance, it was almost impossible to find your way around. It was some time before they discovered the body of Milton Sawyer, aged 55. They found him in the bathroom. The imposing man lay face down on the floor, his hands tied behind his back with duct tape. A small pool of blood had formed beneath him, but nothing seemed to explain how he had lost his life. At first glance, his wounds were superficial and didn't seem serious enough to cause death. No obvious signs of struggle, no clear clues. What had happened in this house? Why and how had this man died? To answer these questions, the investigators knew they would have to meticulously examine every nook and cranny of the house and conduct a thorough analysis of Milton's body. Meanwhile, the woman, still in shock, was taken to a medical facility for first aid. An agent stayed by her side, guaranteeing her safety and monitoring her reactions. But already doubts were creeping in. What was really behind this tragedy? It was assumed that the criminal might return to harm the woman. At around 3 a.m., Milton's family heard the terrible news. The revelation shocked everyone. No one could have imagined that such an affable, smiling man as Milton could have enemies. Milton Sawyer was born in 1963 in a small town called Elizabeth City, North Carolina. It was here that he spent his entire life, and it was also here that he died, killed by an unknown assassin. As a child, he was like all the others, playing with his friends in the woods, building cabins. But what really set him apart was his passion for rare and precious objects. He inherited this love of collecting from his father, so it's not surprising that, as an adult, he opened an antique store. He was often referred to as the treasure hunter because he bought and resold jewelry, and sometimes electronics, which enabled him to live comfortably. Milton had a real knack for unearthing rare and precious objects. When it came to his love life, however, Milton wasn't very lucky. His first marriage in 2000 didn't last. Together they had 3 children, but the relationship ended badly in divorce. After that, instead of concentrating on women, Milton devoted himself entirely to his children. He took them everywhere, to work, on vacation, and always knew how to keep them occupied, entertained. Everyone who knew him considered him a wonderful father. For a long time, Milton kept to himself, without seeking out new relationships. But in 2011, he met Angel Cassinger, a 38-year-old woman by chance, when he went to pick up his children from school. They quickly struck up a conversation and became friends. By this time, Angel was married with 4 children, but she assured Milton that she was in the process of divorcing him. Although Milton was 10 years older, they quickly developed a relationship. They had a lot in common: several children, failed marriages. Milton had already resolved his custody issues, with his children living alternately with him and their mother, while Angel was still in the process of separating. After that first meeting, their relationship intensified and they became very close. In 2012, they were married. Angel, as soon as she joined Milton's antique store, noticed some clutter on the shelves. She then used her aesthetic sense to reorganize the objects, and this gesture had a great impact. Milton found that the store looked much better after the rearrangement, and sales actually increased. However, the couple's real work wasn't just on the shelves of their small antique store. Their family life was far more complex, with no less than 7 children, each with their own character and needs. Finding a balance between running the house and their professional obligations was a real challenge, but they seemed to manage it, together, in perfect harmony. Until, on that famous 2nd of August, 2018, a mysterious intruder changed their lives forever. That day, the city's most renowned collector was pronounced dead. At the scene of the crime, the police discovered a scene that left little room for doubt. Drawers emptied, objects strewn about, everything pointed to a robbery gone wrong. However, the usual injuries associated with this type of assault, such as blows to the head or signs of extreme struggle, were absent. There were no firearm casings either, yet the position of the body told a very different story, that of a bitter struggle. The forensic experts immediately concentrated on finding even the slightest traces of the assailant. DNA, fingerprints, fibers, nothing was to escape them. After a meticulous autopsy, the medical examiner's verdict was in. The cause of death appeared to be positional asphyxia. The deceased's wrists, tied behind his back, combined with a hard surface against his chest, had compromised his breathing. A simple loss of consciousness would have been enough to render his position fatal. But who was this murderer who had dared to break into this peaceful home? The neighbors interviewed were unable to provide any valuable information. All they heard was a thud, followed by an oppressive silence. As for the detectives, they quickly noted an anomaly. There was no sign of forced entry. The key to the rear door, inserted in the lock, caught their attention. An unusual detail, since, according to Angel, the key was usually left on the stoop to allow the children to get in if necessary. Could it be that the intruder had simply seized the opportunity? This hypothesis led investigators to analyze the key for compromising fingerprints. Angel, meanwhile, bore the scars of that tragic night, a slight wound on her forehead, the result of a blow received during the attack. She recounted that on that fateful evening, only she and her husband were at home. Their 2 children, still under their roof, had spent the night with friends. Everything changed around midnight. Having gone down to the kitchen for a snack, Angel opened the door to their bedroom and was transfixed by the dark silhouette of a stranger in the hallway. The man, dressed in black, addressed her in a cold voice, demanding that she hand over the house's hidden treasures. "I know what you're keeping here," he said confidently. It was obvious. This attack was premeditated. Her husband, known as one of the city's leading dealers in gold jewelry, had attracted attention. After obtaining the valuables, the assailant attacked Milton, leaving the 50-year-old no chance. Angel, distraught, received a blow that disorientated her. Falling to the ground, she had no idea how to react. What would you do in the face of such horror? The criminal wasted no time. He tied Angel up with tape, immobilizing her hands and feet. For hours she lay there, helpless, with no news of her husband. Milton was in the bathroom, but she couldn't see him or understand what was happening to him. Fear and anxiety overwhelmed her. But after a few hours, Angel managed with infinite patience to loosen the tape holding her wrists and ankles together. Free at last, she struggled to her feet and rushed to a neighbor's house for help. Once in safety, Angel told the investigators a detail that could change everything. She remembered a suspicious individual. On the very day of the attack, her husband had received a call from an unknown man about the sale of an object. This mysterious man could very well be the assailant. The meeting had taken place at around 9 o'clock. The couple had met a young man who had come to offer them a television set. But Milton, a connoisseur, had immediately recognized that the set was probably stolen and refused the transaction. The disgruntled salesman had left, clearly irritated. Angel wondered if he hadn't been nursing a grudge against her husband. She also remembered the young man well. His name was Dylan. He hadn't come alone, but accompanied by his girlfriend. Angel knew that Milton had dealt with him before, but this time, something was troubling her. She suspected that Dylan and his girlfriend were using illegal substances. By giving a precise description of the couple, she enabled the police to quickly identify the two individuals. And, surprise, the police already knew who they were. As detectives tried to locate Dylan and his girlfriend, several troubling elements emerged in the investigation. Surveillance camera footage near the house showed no suspicious movement, either people or vehicles, heading towards the couple's home. Even stranger, despite the apparent intention to steal, most of the valuables, including jewelry and money, had remained untouched. Even those within reach had not been taken. This was not at all typical of a burglary. Thieves, as a rule, take whatever they can get their hands on. So why had they only taken a small part of the goods? This inconsistency led investigators to consider a much darker hypothesis. What if the motive was not greed? What if the objective was something quite different? But just as they were pursuing this line of inquiry, a piece of news turned the case upside down. Dylan and his girlfriend had been found. They were now in an interrogation room. Arrested for trafficking prohibited substances, they had not yet been charged with the assault. The detectives were cautious and decided not to rush them. During the first questions, they gently broached the subject of the burglary and the attack on Milton. What would they say? Would this couple, already involved in dubious affairs, really be responsible for this tragedy? They didn't understand what it was all about. They seemed genuinely surprised, almost bewildered by the tone of the conversation. Then, in the face of their incomprehension, they were told directly that they were suspected of murder. Yet both presented alibis that seemed impossible to dispute. Regarding the sale of the TV set, the young man and woman claimed to have met an antique dealer early in the evening. However, this meeting, although strange, in no way linked them to the tragic events that followed. According to their version, when the meeting came to nothing, they went their separate ways to try and sell the equipment elsewhere. Dylan, determined to prove his innocence, even immediately handed over his cell phone to the police. This allowed investigators to verify his claims. The result? At the time of the murder, the couple were talking on the phone. The cell phone's geolocation confirmed that they were in another neighborhood, a long way from the scene of the crime. What's more, the fact that they were chatting at that hour clarified their alibi. This incontrovertible proof cleared them once and for all. With that, suspicion evaporated. The detectives, frustrated but methodical, returned to the starting point of their investigation. They no longer had any concrete leads to identify Milton Sawyer's assailant. But the very next day, an unexpected twist turned the case upside down. The forensic pathologist, who had been pondering this complex case over and over again, consulted colleagues and revised his initial conclusions. He came to the certainty that his initial hypothesis was wrong. Milton had not suffocated under his own weight, as initially supposed. He had been held down with obvious force, enough to suffocate him intentionally. An even more disturbing detail emerged: a fracture to the ribcage. This detail confirmed the investigators' theory. But this discovery totally contradicted the testimony of Enzel, Milton's wife. This raised disturbing questions and growing doubts. Digging deeper into the couple's married life, the investigators began to find troubling elements that called into question the idyllic appearance of their marriage. To those close to them, Enzel and Milton appeared happy, having been married for several years, and no one imagined that any cause for conflict, let alone a motive for murder, could exist between them. However, some members of Milton's family began to paint a very different picture of Enzel. She was described as a very egocentric woman with a flamboyant character. Beautiful and confident, she drew attention wherever she went, but it was never enough for her. She always saw herself as superior to others. And yet, this magnetic personality had seduced Milton right from the start. He was crazy about her, and would do anything to please her. Sumptuous jewelry from his antique store, luxurious cars, lavish gifts. Milton would stop at nothing to satisfy his wife's desires. But Milton's brother, David, revealed another side to the marriage. According to him, after 5 years of union, Enzel's demands had begun to grow alarmingly. Her thirst for more seemed insatiable. She could never have enough attention, gifts, or luxuries, despite everything her husband offered her. Yet he seemed to do his best to satisfy her desires. But it wasn't enough. Milton, her husband, was distraught. On several occasions he had confided his doubts and fears to his brother. What if his wife was cheating on him? The thought haunted him. His first suspicions dated back to the end of 2017, after an insignificant event that had changed everything. Angel, his wife, had been in a car accident. Fortunately, she had escaped with minor injuries, nothing serious, but she had complained of persistent pain in her shoulders and hips. For treatment, she had made an appointment at a local physiotherapy practice run by a certain Isaac Melcher, a 38-year-old doctor with a charming smile and an impeccable reputation. Nothing alarming at first sight. At least that's what Milton thought at first. Isaac had prescribed daily sessions. Angel attended enthusiastically. But soon, something had changed. If, at first, she wore simple casual clothes, after a few sessions, she began to prepare as if for a date. She showered just before going, applied her most expensive perfumes, chose her best outfits, and applied her makeup with care. It was clear to Milton. She was doing all this for the physiotherapist. The husband could no longer turn a blind eye. In his eyes, it was a betrayal. He tried to talk to her about it several times. He confronted her, reproaching her for her unusual behavior. But Angel defended herself, always calmly. She explained that she simply liked to take care of herself and look elegant, whatever the occasion. Was this an excuse? A sincere explanation? Milton didn't believe it. His suspicions only grew. Milton was a deeply religious man, a faithful and devoted husband, who had never imagined betraying his wife. His vision of family was sacred. But these changes in his wife's attitude were eating away at him. Isaac Melcher, on the other hand, seemed the epitome of virtue. He attended church regularly, was an exemplary husband and an attentive father to his 3 children. Everyone who knew him praised his uprightness. Was it really possible that such a blameless man could be at the heart of this story? It was this contradiction that intrigued the investigators. When the police questioned Isaac about the affair, he admitted that Milton had been to the clinic on several occasions. He had even caused scenes, in the grip of uncontrollable jealousy. Isaac remembered tense telephone discussions with Milton, but he categorically denied any relationship with Angel. For him, it was a false accusation, a simple projection of the insecurities of a possessive husband. However, the police wanted to know more. They asked to see Isaac's cell phone to verify his claims. Isaac told them a surprising story. According to Isaac, his phone had fallen into the water shortly before the Sawyer house was broken into. He'd had to get rid of the device. A disturbing coincidence. Even stranger, just after the break-in, Isaac had gone into a store to buy a new phone. Coincidence or a clue? What was behind this strange sequence of events? To the police, it all looked like a red flag, a clear warning of deception. They couldn't believe such a coincidence. A man suspected to be in a relationship with a surviving assault victim disappears exactly at the time of the crime, then buys a new phone just after the death of his probable lover's jealous husband. It couldn't have been just a coincidence. The detectives thought the phone hadn't vanished for no reason. Surely there was crucial information on it, evidence that could link Isaac to the murder. The absence of the phone at the time of the crime also made it impossible to check its geolocation, data that could have made all the difference. But Isaac didn't seem to realize that the police could test the theory by checking Angel's phone. That's why the woman was arrested. During her interrogation, Angel claimed that her husband Milton was excessively jealous. She, on the other hand, described herself as a woman who was always well-groomed, who emphasized her beauty through her clothes and jewelry. This style was bound to attract the attention of men, and of course her husband reacted aggressively to the situation. But at 45, Angel insisted that she had never given any legitimate reason for her jealousy. She denied any involvement in the crime, maintaining that she had nothing to do with the tragic event. After questioning, the police found no grounds for arrest, and the widow was released. However, Angel kept pointing the finger at other people, including Milton's business associates. She was convinced that her husband had often been in contact with dubious individuals, criminals selling stolen goods. She even provided some links to accounts on social networks, claiming that these thieves knew where an antique dealer lived and had therefore decided to burglarize his home. Unfortunately, these theories seemed unfounded. The detectives thought Angel was deliberately trying to divert attention and cover his tracks. But why? What was her motive? In any case, every lead she gave was checked, and in every case the police discovered that it was false information. So, despite all these efforts to lead the investigation astray, two suspects remained at the top of the list: the physiotherapist Isaac and the widow of a man whose life suddenly seemed far more complex than she had let on. Investigators examined the doctor's alibi, which stated that, at the time of the crime, he was in Walmart buying a new cell phone. To verify his claim, they requested the store's surveillance camera recordings. Surprisingly, there was no trace of him on the images. What's more, there was no receipt to prove any purchase had been made that day. This seemingly insignificant detail was enough to reinforce the investigators' suspicions. They felt there was now sufficient reason to obtain a search warrant for Isaac's home. On August 8th, having obtained the precious document, they went to his home and found his wife. She informed them that her husband had left the state. She seemed sincere, but what she added was even more intriguing. She would never have suspected an affair between her husband and another woman, yet she had no idea where he was on the night of the murder. All she knew was that he wasn't at home. Isaac had mentioned that he might have been running some errands, but he hadn't seen fit to report back to her. The wife also explained that he had gone to Oregon to visit his mother. At first glance, this might seem harmless, but to the police it sounded like a red flag. Crossing the entire country by car or plane while a murder investigation in which you're indirectly involved is underway. Strange, isn't it? Was he on the run? Did he sense that something was about to go wrong? These questions echoed in the minds of the investigators. Unfortunately for them, despite their efforts to search the house from top to bottom, no tangible evidence was found. No suspicious letters, no incriminating traces, nothing. It was a hard blow, but the case wasn't over. They decided to contact Angel, an acquaintance of Isaac's, to find out where he might be hiding. The young woman confided that the physiotherapist had recently made contact with her via social networks. According to her, he simply wanted to know how she was doing. A simple exchange of courtesies? Perhaps. But why would she have taken the trouble to mention this detail to the investigators? Was it really trivial, or was there a hidden message? It seemed strange enough for the police to focus on this exchange. They asked for her phone, hoping to find something in it that would lead them to Isaac's whereabouts. What could they find? Damning evidence? Another dead end? The mystery remained unsolved, but one thing was certain. The enigma surrounding Isaac had not ceased to surprise. Angel was trying to evade detection, which, for the investigators, only heightened their suspicion. Why mention contact with the main suspect if she had no intention of cooperating fully and showing their exchanges? The woman's behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious. Despite her hesitations, the detectives insisted on examining her phone, and it took them only a few minutes to find a conversation with Isaac. However, in this chat, he didn't call himself Isaac, but Dustin. This detail came as no surprise to the police, who already knew that Dustin was his middle name. More troubling, however, was the tone of the messages. Isaac addressed Angel as "my darling," thus confirming their affair. Once the phone had been briefly inspected, it was returned to Angel. But just as she took it back, a new message arrived before their very eyes. The detectives were on the alert. However, Angel categorically refused to reveal the contents of the message and, to the amazement of the police, she immediately deleted it, as if nothing had happened. At that moment, any remaining doubts about her involvement vanished. She knew something. She was hiding something. The question now was not whether she had anything to do with the crime, but precisely how much responsibility she bore for it. To further their investigations, the investigators decided to confiscate her phone for further analysis. 10 days into the investigation, a crucial revelation was made. A man named Louis contacted the police, introducing himself as one of Isaac's mentors. The latter confided that the physiotherapist had not been the same since a relationship, forbidden to say the least, had begun between him and one of his patients. Isaac had opened up to Lewis, telling him about Angel Sawyer, a married mother of 4. He confessed to having been attracted to her from their first meeting, although it had seemed unnatural. But according to him, Angel had intensified their exchanges, even flirting openly. Isaac resisted for a long time, aware of the rules and the risks involved. But one day, everything changed. Lewis recounted a striking event. Isaac had found Angel in a treatment room, waiting for him completely naked. And that day, despite his convictions and principles, he couldn't resist. This affair, born of a professional encounter, had turned into a destructive whirlwind. But was it simply a forbidden love affair, or the beginning of a darker tragedy? After this meeting, in the few months leading up to Milton's murder, they developed a romantic relationship. The wife told the doctor that her husband would never allow them to be together. She portrayed her husband as a tyrant, a jealous man, and Isaac felt he had to save his beloved. To move their relationship forward, they decided to get rid of this cruel husband. Together, they devised a plan in which they would simulate a home invasion. Isaac was to use the key Angel would leave by the door. The idea was that, during the attack, the couple would be in the bedroom, resting. The doctor entered the house, armed with a pistol, around midnight. He climbed into the bedroom and attacked Milton. The criminal exerted a stranglehold and held his opponent until he stopped resisting. But, in the rush, the lover struck Angel, but he hadn't calculated the force. She fell and hit her forehead hard against the bedside table. This was not part of the plan, but from a criminological point of view, it seemed perfectly plausible as a consequence of the attack. After the incident, Isaac transformed the scene into a burglary, scattering objects on the floor. He also filled a pillowcase with the first jewels he found and fled. The doctor then set about implementing a plan to eliminate all traces of the victim's DNA from his own body, and Angel had to do the same before the police arrived. Isaac disposed of the belongings used in the attack. He dumped the clothes in garbage cans scattered around the city and also got rid of his telephone. An informant made a shocking statement to the police, and Lewis, an investigator, followed up the clues. To this end, the investigators encouraged a mentor to contact Isaac in order to record his confession. In 3 telephone conversations, they were able to confirm that the physiotherapist was indeed having an affair with a patient involved in the attack, and that he was the executor of the crime. Police finally arrested 38-year-old Isaac Melcher, who was already back home in North Carolina. The doctor was taken to the police station and subjected to questioning. The man refused to cooperate with police, prompting detectives to focus on Angel, a 45-year-old woman. They told her they'd arrested her husband's killer and invited her to the police station for reconnaissance. But when she arrived, she too was arrested and taken in for questioning. Eventually, she confessed that she had known about the plan of Isaac, the physiotherapist. According to her, he wanted to get rid of her jealous husband, who was getting in the way of their love. However, the collector's widow said she had tried to dissuade him, but Isaac had become aggressive. She said she feared for her safety and that of her children, which is why she didn't prevent the murder. Angel also claimed that Isaac was literally obsessed with her. But the police already knew this was all a lie. They had proof that they had planned the crime together. In reality, Angel was a manipulator. She had orchestrated the attack, presenting herself as a victim and portraying her husband as a tyrant. She played on her lover's pity and noble feelings, until he took on the role of the knight ready to free her from her marital prison. Isaac, for all his intelligence and apparent poise, had been blinded by love which had overtaken his reason. However, the prosecutor's office faced a problem. Most of the evidence against the widow was circumstantial. During her interrogation, Angel claimed that Isaac was a raving lunatic, a stalker who followed her everywhere, and that she had never wanted a relationship with him. But the detectives managed to inform the physiotherapist of his beloved's behavior, which opened Isaac's eyes. He realized that he had been used, and that she was continuing to manipulate the situation to avoid prison. Furious, Isaac decided to cooperate with the investigators and testify against Angel. In exchange, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and accepted a sentence of 25 years, with the possibility of parole after 20. But the main condition of the deal was that he testify against Angel in court. Angel's trial took place in September 2021. According to the prosecutor, Angel had not been motivated by money. The couple had no life insurance policy, and the house where they lived belonged to Milton, acquired before their marriage. It could neither be divided nor transferred to Angel in the event of Milton's death. During interviews with the investigators, Angel finally admitted that she felt trapped in a loveless marriage. She didn't want to be seen as a woman divorced for the second time, and she felt that killing her husband was the lesser of two evils. On September 16, 2021, Isaac testified against his former lover. He recounted how she had first won his heart, then played on his pity by inventing stories of physical assault and psychological abuse. She had driven him to hate Milton, and Isaac, blinded by love, had felt ready to do anything to save Angel from his so-called suffering. But in reality, he was just a pawn in her game. Angel didn't testify at her trial, but she continued to proclaim her innocence to the end. However, Isaac's words were decisive. The 12 jurors found her guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. A woman sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole, a definitive sentence, sealing her fate forever. But behind this sentence, behind this merciless verdict, lies a series of troubling events, unanswered questions and secrets that seem to refuse to disappear. The little antique store, once warm and lively, never regained its luster. No one wanted to take over the keys after its owner's death. Finally, it closed its doors, taking with it part of the soul of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, in the shadow of the bars, a couple still languish in prison, their fate forever entwined. As for Milton's children, they've been entrusted to family members. A logical decision, but one fraught with emotional consequences. And in the midst of all this, a troubling idea persists. Stockholm Syndrome. That strange condition where the victim begins to feel attachment, even love, for his tormentor. But what if this phenomenon goes even further? Is it possible that psychological trauma could give rise to a kind of addiction to pain? That the mind, scarred forever, unconsciously seeks to reproduce this suffering? And above all, is it possible to build a marriage, a life together, on such a foundation of pain and manipulation? Is it even conceivable that the victim might one day find the strength to turn the tables and escape her tyrant? These are just some of the questions the police have been asking themselves as they attempt to unravel the dark mysteries of the Simca couple's lives. A deeply disturbing story, where every answer seems to raise new questions. It all begins with a young girl, Julin Naik, born in the U.S. state of Ohio. From childhood, her life was marked by instability. The family moved frequently, constantly changing jobs and places of residence. But despite this chaos, Julin shone at school. She was one of the brightest students in her class, attracting attention not through exuberant behavior as one might expect, but through a rare combination of intelligence, gentleness, and natural charm. She had many friends, even if deep down she remained reserved, almost shy. A shyness rooted in deep wounds. For behind her smile and good grades, Julin carried an unbearable secret. For years, she had suffered terrible abuse at the hands of her father. Abuse that went far beyond words, that shattered her childhood and scarred her soul. When her mother discovered the horror of the situation, she didn't hesitate. She denounced her husband to the authorities, leading to a resounding trial. Julin's father was sent to prison, leaving behind a devastated family but perhaps hope for reconstruction. But for Julin, the road to recovery was far from over. During this time, Julin's mother filed for divorce and moved out, hoping to escape their dark past. She did everything she could to protect her daughter, ensuring that the father, once released, would not be able to track them down. But her battle didn't end there. As well as protecting herself, she also had to provide for her little family. She threw herself into hard work, multiplying her hours and efforts to offer Julin a better life, far from the shadows of the old world. Despite the difficulties, she succeeded. They managed to rebuild themselves, to create a new life for themselves. A life where hope was reborn every day, even in the darkest moments. But, although the mother did everything she could to protect her daughter, the scars left by the past were indelible, and Julin's future would unfold differently from what they had hoped.